The moment I saw the HOA crew tearing into my ranch, I said the same thing my grandfather once told trespassers who treated our fences like decoration. I own this land. Get off it. They didn't even look up. Because to them, I was just a rancher in dusty boots, someone easy to bulldoze. What they didn't know was that the pipeline they were installing belonged to a company I secretly owned. But we'll get to that part. The sun wasn't fully up yet. The pecan grove, the one my grandfather planted the year I was born, glowed in that soft, golden light that makes everything look peaceful. Then the machines broke the piece in half. A backhoe screamed through the quiet, diesel fumes rolling through the trees like a storm. Branches snapped. Roots tore out of the earth, 40 years of history ripped up in seconds. Every hit felt like watching someone carve through family. A foreman swaggered toward me, waving a clipboard like it was gospel. HOA-approved drainage project. Permit signed. Non-negotiable. Then I saw the signature. Veronica Ashworth. Ridgehurst HOA President. Real estate royalty. A woman who once fined a neighbor for leaving a garden hose in the wrong shade of green. She wanted to run a 48-inch steel drainage pipe straight through my property, funneling their chemically treated golf course runoff into the creek my cattle drank from. Their offer for the damage? $8,000. I looked around the grove, roots dangling, limbs on the ground like fallen soldiers, and something inside me went quiet. Not anger. Not panic. Something colder. Because while Veronica thought she was stepping over me, she was actually walking straight into a trap she built herself. A trap I'd been preparing for years, ever since her HOA tried pushing my neighbors off their land. To her, my ranch was an inconvenience. To me, her HOA was a storm rolling straight toward us. But she didn't know that I already controlled the dam, and the water behind it. So let me ask you a question. What do you do when someone builds on your land without permission? Some fight. Some fold. I did neither. Because what they destroyed that morning didn't just break the law, it triggered a chain reaction that would tear their entire HOA apart, and they never saw who lit the fuse. When the engines finally went quiet and the last pecan tree dropped, I walked the scar they'd carved through my land. The soil looked torn open, roots exposed like broken ribs. My grandfather always said the land remembers every kindness and every injury. That morning, it remembered nothing but betrayal. I didn't have to guess who ordered this. Veronica Ashworth. Queen of Ridgehurst. Collector of fines. Destroyer of non-aesthetic properties. She'd been circling my ranch for years, calling it rustic, with the same tone you'd use for a dog that refuses to die. But this, cutting through my grove, poisoning my creek, lowballing me with $8,000 insulting dollars, this was her declaration of war. The mistake she made was assuming I'd play defense. I drove home, dropped into the old leather chair my grandfather used when he needed to solve problems bigger than himself, and opened my files. Here's what Veronica never bothered to learn. 15 years ago, during the worst drought this county ever saw, I quietly bought a failing water utility called Clearwater Solutions. Not under my name, under a holding company so forgettable you'd skim right past it in a stack of papers. No press. No ribbon cutting. No bragging. Not because I wanted secrets. Because I wanted options. Out here, water isn't a resource. Water is leverage. Water is survival. Water is power. And Clearwater supplied it to 14 towns. Including Ridgehurst. I stared at the photos of the uprooted pecans, dust settling on the broken roots, and realized something: Veronica hadn't trespassed. She hadn't vandalized. She had stepped directly into the one battlefield where I controlled everything. I called Darnell, my operations manager. He's sharp enough to understand what I don't say. Pull the Ridgehurst contract, I told him. A beat. Should I be concerned? I watched the dust swirling where my trees once stood. No, I said. But they should. While he hunted for the documents, I drove the boundary of my ranch. Survey stakes stood every 50 feet, each one hammered into my soil like a dare. I photographed every one, because in a fight like this, evidence isn't protection. It's ammunition. People think ranchers are simple. We're not. We're patient. We're strategic. We wait for the moment the other side overreaches. And today, Veronica overreached. Because when I opened that rigorous contract, I didn't just find a loophole, I found the crack that would shatter Veronica's entire kingdom from the foundation up. Darnell sent the rigorous water contract within the hour. I sat at my kitchen table, coffee going cold, flipping through 20 pages of legal jargon that most folks ignore. But ranchers don't ignore details. We survive on them. And by page 17, I found the kind of detail that flips an entire war. Clause 7b. Just 5 lines, but it hit harder than a kick to the ribs. If a customer contaminated the watershed feeding Clearwater's system, water rates could spike up to 300%. Then came Clause 9c. Clearwater could force corrective action, on the customer's dime, or cut off their service completely. I stared at those lines like they were a loaded weapon. Rigorist had bulldozed a pipeline across my property. Rigorist had dumped debris, chemicals, and runoff into my creek. Rigorist had polluted the source water feeding my utility. They hadn't just broken a rule. They'd violated the exact clause that could financially ruin them. I didn't call Veronica. Not yet. Leverage is most effective when the other side doesn't know it exists. Instead, I drove into town and bought 4 trail cameras, the kind hunters trust when they know the woods are full of things that don't want to be seen. I spent the afternoon hiding them along the pipeline route, mesquite, brush, deadfall, anywhere a curious HOA worker wouldn't look. For 3 days, nothing. On day 4, everything. The footage showed rigorous maintenance crews popping open pipeline access points and emptying lawn clippings, pool backwash, fertilizer mix, everything except actual stormwater. One guy even joked. "Who's gonna check? It's just a ranch." He was about to learn how wrong he was. I downloaded every clip, made 3 backups, and labeled a folder evidence. When Shauna walked in and saw me hunched over the table surrounded by hard drives, she raised an eyebrow. "What are you doing?" "Just documenting," I said. She knew what that meant. I wasn't stewing. I was loading ammunition. A week later, a glossy rigorous newsletter landed in my mailbox. The headline made my chest tighten. Local ranch threatens community water quality. The article blamed my cattle. Blamed my land. Blamed me. They even used a zoomed-in photo of my barn, angled to make it look like a dump site. That wasn't ignorance. That was strategy. And Veronica had no clue that with every lie she spread, she was tightening the noose around her own HOA. Because the next move she made didn't just cross a line, it turned this dispute into a full-scale war, one that would cost her more than she ever imagined. The newsletter should have been the end of it. A cheap, cowardly swipe, and then they'd move on. But HOAs don't move on. They escalate. Within days, Shauna came home looking like the world had taken a bite out of her. She placed her bag on the counter with hands that trembled just enough to tell me something was wrong. "My principal got an email," she whispered. "It was sent to the entire school board." I didn't say a word. I just waited. They're questioning whether a teacher married to a documented polluter should be influencing children. That word, polluter, felt like being kicked in the ribs. Not because it targeted me. Because it targeted her. They were no longer just going after my land, they were reaching into my home, my family's identities, their careers. That's when I realized this wasn't a dispute anymore, it was a full-blown siege. An hour later, my phone buzzed again. "Mariah. 26. A brand new veterinarian, carrying the Brennan name into a brighter generation. Her voice cracked before she finished her first sentence. Dad, someone taped that newsletter to my apartment door. There was a note with it. It said, "Your father is poisoning our kids." I told her to stay calm. Told her I'd deal with it. But inside, something cold, disciplined, almost military settled into my chest. Small towns breed judgment like pasture grass, fast, thick, and stubborn. Lies grow even quicker. The next morning, 2 anonymous letters sat in my mailbox like rotten fruit. One accused me of being white trash poisoning good people's water. The other threatened a class-action lawsuit. Both sealed with cheap glue and the kind of spite that only spreads behind closed curtains. I stopped visiting the feed store during busy hours. Too many people watching. Too many whispers clipped short when I walked past. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't concern. It was weaponized slander. So I hired someone who couldn't be bribed with HOA potlucks or neighborhood gossip, Derek, an independent hydrology consultant. Early 30s, Birkenstocks, sunburned neck, a ponytail that said he'd spent more time outdoors than indoors. A man who could make talk about sediment flow sound like a thriller. He spent 2 full days testing everything: water upstream and downstream, soil samples, runoff paths, and the HOA's drainage outflows. He didn't talk much. Just squinted at samples like the truth was floating right in front of him. When he finally sent the report, 30 pages thick, the first sentence did all the talking. Brennan property is in full environmental compliance. Contamination originates directly from rigorous HOA drainage infrastructure. No drama. No emotion. Just facts sharp enough to cut through steel. Chemical fertilizers. Pool discharge. Hydrocarbon residue. All of it pointing to rigorous. All of it violations under the Clean Water Act. I printed 6 certified copies and mailed them out, to Veronica, the county environmental office, the state EPA, and Buck. I added an invoice. $1,200 for testing. $8,000 for the easement they violated. $4,500 for cattle stress treatments. Total amount due, $13,700. Veronica's reply? Nothing. But silence isn't peace. It's the rumble before the next hit. Because 10 days later, the county inspector rolled up to my gate, and that's when I learned Rigorist was about to fight dirtier than I ever imagined. 10 days after I mailed Veronica that packet, a county truck crawled up my driveway like it already regretted the trip. A young inspector stepped out, early 20s, nervous, gripping his clipboard with both hands like it might shield him from whatever he was about to walk into. "Sir," he said, shifting his weight, "I have to investigate a complaint that your cattle exceed the permitted grazing head count." There it was. Another rigorous slap, petty, sloppy, and straight out of the HOA harassment playbook. I didn't argue. I didn't sigh. I just led him to the barn office and pulled down 3 binders: grazing permits, vet records, bills of sale. My grandfather organized them decades ago. I kept the system alive out of respect, but today it felt like a weapon. The kid flipped pages, hands shaking by page 6. By the end, his ears were red. "Mr. Brennan, this looks retaliatory," he muttered. "But I still have to file it." "Procedure." "I know," I said. "Tell your supervisor I send my regards." He nodded, embarrassed, and escaped back into his truck. The moment he was gone, I walked to my office and logged into Clearwater's customer database. If Rigorist wanted to drag me through paperwork hell, I'd show them what a real paper trail could do. And there it was. 5 years of water usage logs. 5 years of numbers that told one story loud and clear. Rigorist had been exceeding their contracted water allocation by 18% every single month for 2 straight years. That was 90,000 extra gallons monthly. At $9 per 1,000 gallons. $810 per month. $19,440 in unpaid charges. Add late fees? $23,000 owed. They weren't avoiding payment. Clearwater's staff was just too small, too honest, and too overworked to notice. But now those overlooked numbers were my ammunition. I called Darnell, my operations manager. "Pull the statement," I said. "Send them the invoice." He hesitated. "Boss, this is going to hit them hard." "Good," I said. They lit the match. "We're just installing the smoke detectors." After the call, I sat back and remembered one of my grandfather's warnings. A man who cuts your fence will try to cut your throat next. Ridgehurst had cut everything they could, my land, my water, my reputation. Now they were trying to weaponize county inspectors. But I wasn't playing defense anymore. That night, Shauna, exhausted, worried, done with the charade, asked quietly, "Are you going to tell them you own Clearwater?" I shook my head. "Not yet. Panic grows faster in the dark." And panic was spreading. The hate mail kept coming, but the tone had changed, less righteous fury, more fear. People don't mind attacking you, until they realize you can hit back with overdue bills. Even Rufus, my old hound, barked at the mailman like he knew the envelopes now carried tremors, not threats. And this storm was just warming up. Because what happened next on my land wasn't harassment, it was an act of sabotage that crossed every line Ridgehurst thought they could tiptoe around. I woke at 3 a.m. to a sound that didn't belong anywhere on a quiet ranch night. At first, half asleep, it blended in, maybe the AC cycling, maybe a semi groaning along the highway miles away. But then came the crunch. Gravel. Slow. Deliberate. Too close to ignore. I sat upright, heart thudding in that way it does when instinct wakes you before your mind catches up. Then another sound, a truck engine, idling low, like someone trying to stay hidden in plain sight. I slipped out of bed, grabbed my flashlight and took the shotgun off the rack. Not loaded, but the pump-action sound alone can end most conversations before they start. The porch boards creaked under my boots as I stepped out into the heavy July air. The night was thick enough to chew, crickets buzzing, the breeze barely moving. But the engine? Gone. What lingered was the smell. Exhaust. Fresh. I followed it across the yard toward the far fence line near the pipeline easement, and when my flashlight finally found the metal, my stomach dropped. 50 feet of my barbed wire was cut, not torn, not trampled, cut. Clean, deliberate slices. 3 fence posts knocked over, the wire curled neatly on the ground like someone had rolled it up to save time. This wasn't kids. This wasn't vandals. This was someone who knew exactly what they were doing. And they'd created a perfect doorway. My cattle had already wandered through the gap, drawn toward Ridgehurst's pristine, overwatered golf course, green enough to glow in moonlight, more lush than anything should be at 3 in the morning. I started herding them back just as headlights swept across the fairway. A Ridgehurst security guard in a golf cart rolled up, radio already glued to his mouth. "I've already called the sheriff," he said smugly, before I even opened my mouth. Of course he had. That was the point. By the time the deputy arrived, I had the cattle back inside the fence and was shining my light on the cut wires. He took photos, frowned, and shook his head like he wished he could make a different decision. "Livestock at large," he said. "That's a $500 citation." I pointed at the clean cuts. "Someone did this intentionally." He sighed. "You can file a vandalism report, but without witnesses." We both knew what that meant. I'd be paying the fine, and the HOA knew it. The next morning, with the sun turning the air into soup, I was out there repairing fence. Sweat poured down my back, blisters forming with every swing of the post driver. My grandfather's old words kept echoing in my skull. A man who'll cut your fence will cut your throat if he gets the chance. Something shifted in me then. This wasn't petty anymore. This wasn't retaliation. Ridgerist had crossed into something uglier, deliberate, calculated sabotage. And they were betting I'd just take it. But if they wanted escalation, they were about to learn how dangerous that bet was. Because the moment I checked the next set of records, I uncovered violations so massive they could financially and legally bury the entire Ridgerist HOA. The morning after patching the fence, I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of harsh black coffee, the kind that keeps your eyes open even when your spirit wants to shut down. I opened the file that had been sitting in my inbox like a ticking bomb, Ridgerist's complete water usage logs. Darnell had sent me the raw spreadsheets days ago, but I hadn't had the patience, or the stomach, to comb through them line by line. But after the sabotage in the Grove, I wasn't putting it off anymore. 5 minutes in, my jaw was tight. 10 minutes in, my coffee tasted like metal. 20 minutes in, I realized the truth was worse than anything we'd assumed. Ridgerist wasn't just exceeding their contracted water limit. They were blowing past it like a runaway freight train. Some months showed them 20% over. Others nearly 30%. Their golf course alone guzzled more water in a single week than my entire ranch used across 4. And the worst part? None of it was recorded accurately. None of it was billed. None of it was disclosed anywhere. On paper, Ridgerist looked sparkly clean. In reality, they were violating almost every major rule in the contract. Then I hit Section 12D, the one clause most HOAs pray never gets highlighted. Excessive unreported consumption may constitute unauthorized extraction and is subject to immediate penalty or suspension. Suspension. The nuclear word. The one no HOA president ever wants to hear. For the next 2 hours, I turned my table into a war room, usage graphs, highlighted passages, screenshots, meter logs. The deeper I dug, the clearer the pattern became. This wasn't accidental. This wasn't clerical error. This was structured misreporting, water siphoned off the books, consumption disguised by distributing taps across multiple meters, the numbers padded with landscaping invoices and cheerful bulletins in their HOA newsletters. It was fraudulent. It was intentional. And it had been happening for years. I sent the compiled packet to Darnell with one instruction. Review it quietly. Don't alert them. We'll move together. He replied within seconds. Boss, this is real bad. Like, legal trouble bad. I knew that. But I didn't want revenge, I wanted leverage. Enough leverage to stop them from digging themselves, and me, any deeper. Later that afternoon, Shauna found me standing at the edge of the pecan grove. The trench had been filled, but the soil was too flat, too heavy, like a wound stitched shut without cleaning it. You're thinking about confronting them, she said softly. No, I said. I'm thinking about when to confront them. She stepped closer, eyes narrowed. Dad, they're not slowing down. She was right. Every hostile letter, every threat, every accusation, they were sprinting toward a cliff they didn't even realize existed. That night, I attended the county water board meeting, sitting quietly in the back. Veronica stood at the podium, dressed sharp, smile tight, giving a glowing speech about Ridgerist's excellent conservation efforts and responsible water management practices. I almost choked. Behind the rehearsed lines, she was unraveling, hands trembling, voice cracking whenever questions drifted near anything about consumption reports. She knew something was off. She knew the truth was circling. She just didn't know I was the one holding the match. And as she finished her presentation, I realized something. Veronica wasn't just hiding a violation. She was standing on top of one. And the next week proved that Ridgerist wasn't just negligent, they were seconds away from a collapse so big it would drag every secret into the light. The disaster didn't arrive with thunder or alarms. It slipped in quietly, too quietly. A week after the county meeting, I noticed the creek running lower than normal. Not dry. Not muddy. Just strained. Like something upstream was stealing from it. My cattle felt it first. They sniffed the water, backed away, and refused to drink. Animals sense danger long before people catch the scent. By the second day, the creek carried a faint chemical smell. Sharp. Metallic. Wrong in a way you feel in your teeth. I scooped a jar full and set it on the kitchen counter. Even through glass, the water looked off, like it didn't belong in a place where things are supposed to live. I called Derek, and he was on my land before sundown, testing kit in hand, jaw clenched tight. He knelt by the creek, dipped one probe, and frowned so fast my stomach tightened. "That's elevated nitrogen," he said. "Way too high." "Fertilizer runoff?" I asked. "And something else," he muttered, the kind of tone scientists use when they don't like the answer forming in their head. He followed the creek upstream, straight toward Ridgehurst. Then we found it. 100 yards from the property line, the ground sagged under our boots. Not from rain, we hadn't seen a drop in weeks. This was different. A wet, spongy patch of soil with water pushing upward in slow, sickening bubbles. A rupture. The pipeline had burst underground. Derek crouched, brushed away a layer of dirt, and the earth exhaled, a sudden surge of water hissing upward like a punctured tire. The smell hit us a beat later: chlorine, fertilizer, chemicals mixing into a cocktail that should never touch a pasture, or a creek, or a rancher's lungs. "This isn't stormwater," Derek said, covering his nose. "This is concentrated runoff from their retention tanks. Industrial level. In simple terms, the HOA's entire drainage system was bleeding poison directly into my land." I filmed everything: photos, videos, timestamps. Evidence. Truth against their lies. When I called the county emergency line and explained what we were dealing with, the dispatcher's tone flipped instantly from bored to alert. 2 hours later, 3 county trucks, a state inspector, and a hazmat consultant were at my gate. As they walked the site, their expressions shifted from confusion, to concern, to disbelief. One whispered, "This is Category 2, maybe Category 3. Another asked, "How long have you known about this?" "Today's the confirmation," I said. And it was the truth. They didn't look at me like a suspect. They looked at me like a man lucky to still have functioning lungs. Meanwhile, Ridgehurst carried on in total ignorance. Their perfectly manicured lawns glowed under sunrise sprinklers. Golf carts hummed peacefully along perfect paths. Sprinkler arcs glittered like diamonds, even while contaminated water seeped beneath their feet, through their soil, into their picture-perfect world. The state inspector sealed the creek access and hammered up a bright warning sign. "Water unsafe, under investigation." And that sign? That was the beginning of their panic. And panic is leverage. Because the next day, when Veronica finally called me, her voice trembled, and she had no idea that the worst shock was still waiting for her. Veronica called far too early for anyone bringing good news. Her voice wasn't just tense, it was stretched thin, like she'd tied herself together with dental floss and hoped I wouldn't notice. We saw the notice by the creek," she began, skipping any greeting. "The county is claiming there's contamination. They're implying it came from our infrastructure." I leaned back in my chair. Slow. Deliberate. "Oh? Is that what they're implying?" Her breath hitched. She pushed forward like someone trying to outrun the truth. "The board is extremely concerned. This could impact our insurance. Our property values. The golf course. The entire community's reputation." There it was. Ridgehurst HOA distilled to its purest form. Not concern for the land. Not concern for the water. Not concern for the people downstream. Just money. Just image. Just the fragile ego of a community that believed it was untouchable. I kept my voice steady, controlled, cold. What exactly do you want from me, Veronica? Silence. A long, uncomfortable one. I could almost picture the scene, the full HOA board huddled around her phone, whispering instructions like stage directors in panic. We'd like to cooperate, she said finally. The county mentioned you submitted evidence. Perhaps you could share what you provided so we can understand the full picture. They were scared. For the first time. I didn't answer. I let the weight of the silence force her into honesty. We're also willing to reevaluate the, easement situation, she added quickly. Maybe work out something more fair. Fair. From the same people who cut my land without permission. Contaminated my creek. Dragged my family's name through meetings. Filed false complaints. And sabotaged my fence like petty criminals. Put your offer in writing, I said. I'll look it over. She exhaled like she'd just convinced a bomb not to detonate. Thank you, truly. We appreciate your willingness to. I hung up. The proposal. By afternoon, their proposal showed up in my inbox. It was insulting, comically so. A $12,000 remediation payment paired with a non-disclosure agreement. An NDA. As if I'd ever stay quiet about what they'd done. I forwarded it to my attorney. He called me 5 minutes later, laughing. Brennan, they think 12 grand and a gag order will fix this? They're looking at 6 figures, minimum. While he prepared the response, I drove back to the creek. The warning tape flicked in the wind like a caution flag. The air smelled of damp earth mixed with the metallic bite of chemicals. Derek's markers traced the rupture site, stakes, orange flags, spray paint marking the exact path where negligence finally surfaced. The water, thinner than usual, carried the quiet evidence of everything Rigorist had tried to bury. They had built a system of shortcuts and arrogance, and now they were drowning in it. And the funny part? They hadn't seen the worst of it yet. Because the county's full report was due any moment. And I already knew what it said. And when that report finally hit, it didn't just expose Rigorist, it triggered a chain reaction they never saw coming, one that would burn their entire empire to the ground. The county's full report arrived on a Wednesday morning, a thick, overstuffed envelope stamped urgent, environmental hazard findings enclosed. I didn't open it right away. I stood on the porch with it in my hands, feeling the weight. Reports like this don't inform you. They change things. They end excuses. They kill the lies people cling to. When I finally broke the seal, 27 pages slid out, photos, chemical readings, timelines, cross-sections of the ruptured line, and paragraphs of violations stacked like dominoes. The conclusion was a death sentence. Contamination originated from structural failure in Rigorist HOA drainage pipeline. Severe neglect contributed to environmental damage. Not potentially. Not under investigation. No soft edges. Originated. Neglect. Damage. 3 words HOA lawyers pray they never see in the same paragraph. Rigorist wasn't facing a problem. They were facing accountability, legal, financial, and public. The call that made it official. That afternoon, the county investigator phoned me. His voice was clipped, formal, like he knew exactly how explosive this was. Mr. Brennan, we're issuing Rigorist a full compliance order. Excavation, repair, soil treatment, water remediation, the works. This won't be quick. And the creek? I asked. We're mandating weekly testing until levels return to baseline. They're responsible for the costs. Rigorist was going to hate that. No, they were going to panic. The HOA's spin machine breaks down. By evening, the board blasted a formal statement to all residents. It read like someone fed a PR intern a thesaurus. Unexpected infrastructure issue. Temporary environmental concerns. Routine maintenance review. Not one word about neglect. Not one word about the pipeline slicing through my land. Not one word about the toxins in the water. But this time, the residents didn't swallow the story. My phone started buzzing non-stop, texts from the same people who'd spent months pointing fingers at me. Some apologized. Some demanded transparency. Most were furious they'd been lied to. Then the wildfire began. Drone footage of the spill hit a local Facebook group. Screenshots of county documents appeared. Comment sections erupted. HOA contaminated the Rancher's Creek. They covered it up. Insurance rates are going up. Why didn't they fix this years ago? They lied to all of us. Rigorist had lost control of the narrative, and trust. And once a community turns on its HOA, it gets ugly fast. Legal pressure begins. My attorney finalized the demand letter. Environmental testing costs. Cattle care. Fence and land restoration. Legal fees. Water access loss. Years of unpaid overages. The amount wasn't symbolic. It was substantial, big enough to make their board sweat. By morning, Rigorist was in full collapse mode. 3 board members resigned. Residents demanded an emergency meeting. Accusations flew in every direction. And Veronica, Rigorist's queen of control? Silent. Which only meant one thing. She was planning something. And she didn't disappoint. Because Rigorist's next move wasn't desperate, it was dangerous. And it pushed this entire war right to the edge of collapse. Rigorist's next move didn't arrive with an apology or a negotiation. It arrived in a thick, cream-colored envelope stamped legal notice, the kind designed to intimidate before you've even opened it. The kind movie villains slide under doors just before everything goes off the rails. I tore it open at the kitchen table while Shauna stood behind me, arms folded tight, already bracing for the worst. Inside, a cease and desist order from Rigorist's attorneys. They accused me of defamation, interfering with community operations, intentionally damaging the HOA financially. They demanded I stop making public claims about their drainage failure and remove any digital content portraying Rigorist in a negative light. In other words, they wanted me silent, muzzled, and obedient. I actually laughed. I hadn't posted a single thing online. The homeowners themselves had leaked everything. The county's notices were public record. The Facebook wildfire had nothing to do with me. But Rigorist needed a scapegoat. They needed an enemy. They chose me. The lawyer's verdict. The next morning I dropped the envelope on my attorney's desk. He skimmed it once, snorted, and flicked it aside like a cheap bluff. "They're spiraling," he said. "This letter isn't enforceable. If anything, it proves retaliation." He drafted a response so sharp it could have drawn blood. "My client will not be silenced. Any attempt at retaliation will be added to ongoing claims." We sent it certified. Rigorist wanted a war of threats. We gave them consequences. The quiet defectors. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. 2 Rigorist board members, the same 2 who had abruptly resigned, asked to meet somewhere private. Not in the community. Not near anyone who might recognize them. We met at a small cafe off the highway. Both men looked drained, like weeks of stress had been sanded into their faces. "We didn't know the pipeline was that bad," one said, voice cracking. "The president dismissed every maintenance report," the other added. "She insisted the ranch wasn't a priority. She told us you'd cooperate eventually." Cooperate. As if the land wasn't mine. As if my family's water didn't matter. As if I existed purely for HOA convenience. But then they dropped the real bombshell. For 2 full budget cycles, Veronica had blocked pipeline repair funding, because she didn't want to raise monthly fees. She gambled with infrastructure to protect her image. Her reputation meant more to her than the community's safety. More than environmental law. More than basic decency. Before we ended the meeting, one of the men leaned forward and lowered his voice. "She's pushing for emergency authority," he whispered. "She wants to bypass the community vote and handle this internally. If she succeeds, she'll bury half of this." I nodded slowly. "I know," I said. "And I'm ready." What they didn't know, what nobody knew, was that earlier that morning, I'd received an email from the State Environmental Office. And the moment I opened it, everything shifted. Because what the state told me next meant Ridgehurst wasn't just facing fines, they were facing consequences no HOA president could charm, threaten, or bury. "You said." The message from the State Environmental Office wasn't long, but it hit harder than any letter Ridgehurst had sent me. 4 sentences. That was all. 4 sentences that carried the weight of a courtroom verdict. The breach was no longer a county issue. It was officially classified as a state-level environmental violation. That meant mandatory remediation, state oversight, audits, heavy fines, and zero room for excuses. No HOA president could charm their way out of that. Not even Veronica. Ridgehurst implodes. By noon, the news spread through Ridgehurst faster than gossip ever had. The community's group chats exploded, screenshots leaked everywhere. Residents who once defended the board were now tearing it apart. Why were we never told? Why didn't you approve repairs years ago? Is my property value going to drop? Is this why our water bills suddenly doubled? Who signed off on this pipeline project? Panic turned into blame. Blame turned into revolt. And standing in the center of the storm was Veronica, silent, pale, clutching her clipboard like it was a life raft. By late afternoon, the HOA announced an emergency town hall. I didn't hesitate. I went. The town hall meltdown. The community center was overflowing, standing room only. The energy was heavy, the kind you feel before a thunderstorm breaks. People whispered, glared, muttered accusations under their breath. Veronica stepped up to the microphone. Gone was the polished, perfectly rehearsed president. In her place stood someone cracked, shaken by consequences she thought she could outrun. "We appreciate everyone being here," she began, voice thin. "There have been misunderstandings regarding the environmental findings." A woman in the front row shot her hand up. "Misunderstandings? The state report literally says we caused the contamination. You told us the rancher ruined the creek." The room erupted, voices overlapping, tempers rising, fear turning sharp. I didn't plan to speak. But chaos leaves no space for truth unless someone stands up for it. I stepped forward. "If I can clarify," I said. The room fell silent like someone hit a switch. Veronica's face went white. The truth, unfiltered. I introduced myself and walked everyone through the timeline, the low water levels, the chemical smell, the soil leak, Derek's findings, the county's investigation, the state's confirmation. All facts. No theatrics. Then I delivered the line that snapped the last thread holding the room together. Ridgehurst has been using more water than their contract allows. For years. Shock. Gasps. Murmurs rising like a tide. I continued. They owe tens of thousands in unpaid usage. And because of the contamination, the state may add additional penalties. A man in the back stood up. "You're telling us we have to pay for her negligence?" I didn't sugarcoat it. "Yes. That's how HOAs work. The community pays for the board's decisions. Veronica lunged toward the microphone. That is not. I raised the contract copy. Section 9C and 12D. You're welcome to read it out loud. Silence slammed into the room. Board members stared at Veronica like strangers seeing her for the first time. Residents looked betrayed, blindsided, furious. It wasn't just the contamination. It wasn't just the lies. It was the realization that the person they trusted had gambled with their money, their land, and their future. The fracture wasn't forming. It had already split wide open. Because what happened after that town hall didn't just end the battle. It ended Veronica's power, her image, and her entire legacy in a single, devastating sweep. You said. The fallout from the town hall didn't drift in slowly, it slammed into Ridgehurst like a collapsing dam. By sunrise, residents were in open revolt. Their forum was on fire, comments pouring in by the minute. A resignation petition gained over 100 signatures before breakfast. People who once defended the board were now openly demanding accountability. Veronica didn't post a statement. She didn't explain. She didn't deny. She simply disappeared. In Ridgehurst, silence wasn't strategy. It was a confession. 3 days later, a certified letter arrived in my mailbox. I opened it on the porch, the paper still warm from the delivery truck. It was her resignation. Effective immediately. Veronica Ashworth, the same woman who bulldozed my land, falsified reports, blocked repairs, weaponized rules, and gambled the entire community's water supply, was finally stripped of the power she'd clung to for years. But her exit wasn't closure. Not yet. A new board, a new tone. The acting board reached out to me next. Their voices were different, steady, sincere, humbled by the mess they inherited. They asked to meet, in good faith. For the first time since this started, I agreed. We met at my ranch. I walked them through everything. The ruined grove. The patched fence. The sectioned-off creek. The soil markers from the state team. No euphemisms. No softened language. The damage was real. It was visible. And it was theirs to repair. I laid out my terms plainly. Full environmental restoration, supervised by the state. Compensation for veterinary bills and damaged property. Reimbursement for months of water testing. A corrected, legally binding easement with boundaries that actually meant something. No NDAs, no secrecy, no rewritten version of events. And finally, every penny of their unpaid water overages. I expected pushback. There was none. They nodded. Quiet. Understanding. This time, the board wasn't negotiating from arrogance. They were negotiating from responsibility. The final settlement totaled $268,000. Not punitive. Not vengeful. Just the exact cost of every reckless decision their former president made. Unearthing the truth, literally. Weeks later, the county authorized excavation of the damaged line. I stood with inspectors as the machines tore open the earth. What we found wasn't a surprise. But it was worse than expected. Corroded pipe sections so brittle they crumbled in gloved hands. Broken seals. Improper joints. Patchwork repairs that looked like they'd been done by someone rushing to clock out early. This wasn't bad luck. It wasn't weather. It wasn't unexpected infrastructure failure. It was years of deliberate neglect. As crews replaced the entire system, environmental teams treated the soil and tested the creek. The water was finally running clean again. Slowly, painfully, the grove began to heal too. A quiet ending. One afternoon, Shauna, Mariah, and I watched the workers from the porch. Dust rose in waves. Machinery hummed. The land, scarred but breathing again, stretched out across the horizon. Mariah nudged me gently. "You did the right thing, Dad," she said. "A lot of people would have let it go." I shook my head. "No. Most people don't get pushed this far." The wind rustled the grass. The creek trickled clear. For the first time in months, the ranch felt like itself again, steady, peaceful, grounded. Ridgerists had learned their lesson. The hard way. Because they thought they could build a pipeline through my land. But what they never realized was this. I owned the water flowing through theirs.